Welcome to future learners to our webinar on the secret power of brands. Thank you very much for joining us, whether you're joining live or whether you're watching us recorded. I'm going to be here for 30 minutes. I'm here in the Wolf Ollings office in London, tucked away actually in a basement meeting room, ready to answer your questions for the next half hour or so. And a number of you have posted questions either on step 4.2 on the platform on FutureLearn or through Twitter using the hashtag #FLBrands. So the first question that we've got is from Kipley, who's saying, I'm often amused by the names auto manufacturers give their vehicle models. Frequently, these are nonsensical words that don't even exist. For example, Nissan Navara, Mitsubishi Strada. What's the creative process here? And how do they determine if these weird names will be accepted by the public? Very good question, and it isn't just about cars, is it? Naming is a thing across every category, and if I'm honest, I would have to say that of all the things that we do here at Wolf Ollings in branding, naming is the hardest. Why is that? Because everybody has a view about names. Everyone is an expert on names. People feel very strongly about if it's your company or your product that's being named, then it's your baby. You feel incredibly strongly about the right name and the wrong name. And I think clients tend to imagine that for any given product or service or company, the perfect name exists. And all that we have to do as brand advisors is to just go out and find that perfect name. And all of our experience here is that the perfect name doesn't exist, that you don't find it, you make it, and you make the name that best works. We've just been involved in the last couple of weeks with a very large financial services business in America. They want to change the name of their holding company. Really difficult thing to do, to find the right balance between being unusual and distinctive, but also having the right kind of level of seriousness and gravitas for a big organization. Car companies, car brands, a very interesting case. You're asking why are they so weird, and what's the creative process? That they're weird, I guess, because the name that stands out in the marketplace is an unusual name. If it's a perfectly normal, predictable name, then it won't stand out. It won't get remembered. It's too ordinary, too bland. And I guess what we see in car product brand naming is a lot of strange made-up words. We also see a number of words that are meant to convey the right emotions because they sound vaguely Latin, Italian, Mediterranean, sporty, or even possibly Central American, and names like Navarra do that. But we're also, I think, more interestingly seeing names that are real proper names, like Opel, which is Vauxhall in Britain, has a car called the Adam. That's just somebody's name, but it's rather a cute name, I think, for a small car. Or companies take a familiar word and spell it slightly differently. So again, the Opel or Vauxhall Mocha. Mocha is the name of the drink, but here it's spelled M-O-K-K-A. And those slightly weird conjunctions of slightly unusual letters like a K or an X are absolutely part of the armory of naming, because it's those unusual things, the unusual letters, that make a name stand out. What's the creative process in naming? Well, I wish there was a process. I wish there was a formula for coming up with a really good name. I don't think there is. I think the closest that you can get to a process is a little bit of work to define what it is that the name needs to do, what are the competitor names that it needs to stand out from, what are some of the names that perhaps the owner of the brand likes and doesn't like, because it is a very kind of personal thing. So that's the sort of brief. And then I think it's just a process of creativity on as many fronts as possible. Brainstorming with groups of people, maybe, although my experience is that you get a bunch of people together to brainstorm names and they tend to come up with the same names over and over again. So it's often more interesting to set individual people off to just go and think, maybe to bring in new kinds of skills, perhaps to bring a poet in, someone whose whole life is about words. Sometimes it's fun just to kind of randomize and to almost flick through a dictionary, finding words that for some completely inexplicable reason seem to work. And then playing, just having fun and taking a word and seeing what happens if you change the ending or change the spelling. So mocker turned to M-O-K-K-A. We were working with my university students a couple of months ago on a name for a product which is made from this miracle ingredient called graphene, the thinnest material that exists, only an atom thick. And the name, the student team were playing around with a lot of names that started H-E-X, because graphene has a hexagonal chemical pattern to it, so HEX from the hexagonal, but then doing something with the end of it, at the end of the word, and they ended up with the name Hexu, H-E-X-U, which obeys a lot of the conventions for coming up with a great new name, which is that there is a bit of a logic for it, the HEX. There's an unusual letter in it, the letter X, and then maybe an unusual ending as well, the Hexu. So there was a name that worked. I guess my biggest learning point about naming came very early on in my career at Wolf Owens, when we were working for a new mobile phone network here, and it was based on a technology called PCN, Personal Communication Network, very early days of digital mobile phones. So we had a team of people here who were really keen on the name Pecan the nut, P-E-C-A-N, because it was based on the technology PCN, logic for it. But our creative director, Doug, proposed a different name, which was Orange. And Orange, of course, is the name that stuck. And what I learned from that was that sometimes the best name has no rational, logical reason for it at all, that rationalization can get in the way, and that sometimes it's all just to do with the feel, the emotion, and Orange was all about a bright colour and an emotion to do with optimism. And of course it was Orange that won the day, and that is still an incredibly important, successful tech brand and telecoms brand around the world. So sometimes logic has no role in naming. So anyway, Kippy, thank you very much for your question on that. I hope that answer helped. Now, Jose Luis says an important aspect nowadays in brand management is to go beyond a visual system and create actions to engage people around the brand. How can you measure the success of these actions? And I think you're absolutely right. In engagement is a very big word in branding, and it could mean engaging people inside the organisation, employees, or it could mean engaging the wider public as well. And I guess engaging, what does engage mean? It's a funny word. I guess it means bringing people in and getting them to act in some way, to do something beyond just consuming or beyond just turning up at work. So yeah, a lot of our work here in Wolf Owens is about engaging people one way or another. we've just been talking just before this webinar about a potential new client here, which is a charity, a not-for-profit that funds research in a very important growing medical condition. So what it does is very important, but it's a condition where there isn't enough funding at the moment. So I think what we're going to have to help this organisation do is engage many, many more people here in Britain in the disease that it's dealing with, and in giving money, but also just getting involved, taking an interest, thinking that it's important, making sure that politicians understand that it's important so that they fund it, making sure that companies understand that it's important so that they perhaps become charity sponsors. And it's really about changing how people think and how they feel and how they act. And I guess that's a good summary of what engagement means: changing how people think, how they feel, how they act. And of course, that's the great thing about branding. That's exactly what it does. It does change how people think and feel and act in a really deep way. The internal part of it, the employee engagement, as it's called, is now such a huge part of what we do. What goes on behind the scenes in our client companies is often much more significant than what actually goes on out in the marketplace. Why is that? Because an organisation can only do what it needs to do if it's got its own people on side and deeply committed to it. In other words, not just turning up for work, but doing all the right things, making the right decisions, going the extra mile, as people say, engaging people in the brand. One of my favourite hotel chains, and this is a really big thing, of course, in service companies, where you need every customer-facing employee to be living the brand minute by minute, because whenever they don't, that destroys the brand very slightly in the minds of the customer. This Spanish hotel chain is called Meliá, and Meliá has a very interesting way of engaging its employees, which is that there is a brand gesture. So when a Meliá employee greets a customer or even a fellow employee, they do this. If you can see that, they put their hand on their heart to, I suppose, to symbolise, I'm doing this from the heart. It sounds, when I describe it like that, it sounds cheesy and it sounds kind of fake, but in reality it works because it's done very naturally. It's not done robotically by rote, and that, I think, is a sign of real employee engagement in a brand. And of course, a gesture like this is not part of the visual management system. It's not like a logo or a colour. Harder to manage. So the question, I think, Jose Luis, you were asking was, how does one measure the success of all of that? And I think the answer is that if what you're trying to do through engagement is change how customers or employees think and feel and act, the ultimate of those is act. You can measure how they think and feel through surveys, but the really important thing is, how do they act? So for me, the most important thing to measure when you're assessing the success of an engagement program is the extent to which customers bought your product or service, the extent to which they keep buying it, and the extent to which sales and revenue are growing. And similarly, I think when you look inside an organisation, you're looking at, again, you can do surveys to find out how people think and feel, but you're really looking at how they act, and that might be measured in things like just simply productivity. How productive are they? It might be measured in, if you're a customer-facing hotel employee, it might be measured actually through the feedback from customers. So do customers actually feel good as a result of the behaviour, the actions of that employee? So I think summarising my answer, Jose Luis, to your question, is engagement getting increasingly important, measured by measuring how people think and feel through surveys, but most importantly, by measuring how they act in terms of sales, really, if you're a customer, in terms of productivity, if you're an employee. And why is all this engagement becoming more important? Perhaps just worth touching on that for a moment. I think because of a couple of things, I think. Why does customer engagement matter? Because there's a lot of evidence that consumers increasingly expect to be active and not just passive consumers. They want to kind of take part in what the organisation or the product or the service is all about. So, and we talk about the word consommateur. It's a lovely French word meaning half consumer, half actor. So companies want to engage customers because customers want to be actors. They want to be consommateur. Why does it matter internally? Because what your people do determines how your customers feel about you, more than things like advertising. Customers relatively believe advertising less than they used to. They believe the reality that they see in front of them much more. And if that reality is the behaviour of an employee of the company, then that's what they will form their judgments on. So we are at 17 minutes past the hour now, so we're halfway through. Thank you to Kipli and to Jose Luis for those two questions. We'll move on to another one, and if you've got a question, then do ask. If we have time, then we will answer it, either by posting it on step 4.2 or by tweeting using the hashtag FLBrands. So Noel asks about brand damage and says that phishing emails and spam often contain falsified branding and logos. What effects are there on the rightful owner's reputation and livelihood? What, if any, branding protection exists online, including social media? A good question, and a really current one, given the prevalence of things like phishing. That's phishing with a PH rather than phishing with an F. And I guess we all get probably 1 or 2 emails a week that look as though they come from a company, but actually don't. And of course, the thing that's scary is that the criminals doing this stuff are getting better and better at branding, better and better at graphic design, better and better at making the email that they're sending out look real. So in the correct typeface with the correct logo, perhaps even using the correct tone of voice, the writing style that brand would use. And I have to say, I have almost been caught out a couple of times on this. How can brand owners protect themselves? Well, any activity like this is illegal. I guess the legal system is going to vary from one country to another, but in a country like Britain, there is something that you are not allowed to do, which is called passing off, which is claiming to be a company or a product that you are not, and that is illegal. So there is legal protection for the brand owners, and I guess a really clever and successful phishing scam could have quite a serious effect on the reputation of the company that is being passed off here. So there are protections against it, but it is a big deal. there is a slightly more grey area in this world, which you see particularly in supermarkets, in consumer product packaging, and in perhaps particularly in discount supermarkets, who like to create brands that are not real brands. They're just logos and names that belong to the supermarket, in order to look a little bit like the brand leader. So a supermarket might package its washing powder in a way that looks rather like the brand leading washing powder, or similarly with ketchup or chocolate or any other product. And they tread a very fine line, and I'm sure they have lawyers who are constantly looking at what they can do and they can't do. If there is a point at which consumers could genuinely be misled and taken in, then they won't be allowed to do that. But they can go quite a long way along the line. I think lawyers understand that consumers are, on the whole, pretty sophisticated these days. They know what these supermarkets are doing. They know that it's not really the real thing. And there's a game that's being played that everybody agrees to take part in which the supermarket will kind of pretend to be, will kind of look like the brand, the familiar branded product, but not quite. Know that it knows that it's playing the game, and its customers know that the game is being played. And there are interesting limits to what you can and can't protect. There was a story just a couple of weeks ago about Nestle trying to protect the Kit Kat chocolate bar, not the name or the logo or the packaging, but the shape of the bar itself. And in Britain, lawyers wouldn't let them do that. It was felt that they don't have any proprietary rights over the product shape with these 4 bars in one block of chocolate. So they can absolutely protect the name Kit Kat and the packaging and the logo and the colour and all the rest of it, but they can't necessarily protect the product itself. I hope that helps, Noel. It's a big and interesting and complicated question. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm sure an intellectual property lawyer will be able to give you a more detailed answer than that. So we're now 23 minutes into this webinar. We've got 7 minutes left to go. A question that I'm often asked is about startups, and it may be that a number of you have got small businesses, startup businesses that you're trying to get off the ground. And the question that I'm asked is, do startups need branding? Does a startup need a brand agency? Surely there are more urgent things that a startup needs to do. It needs to just get on with making its product and selling its product. And my argument is no, that even a startup should devote a bit of time to thinking about the things we talk about in this course: purpose, proposition, personality, in order to maximize their chances of attracting customers, because every startup does need customers, attracting people, talent, because as the startup grows, it will need to attract the best people to come and work for a relatively unknown business, and perhaps most urgently of all, in terms of attracting investors, because investors will invest in a product, yes, but they are more keen to invest in a brand that has got a life beyond that particular product. And I think for a startup, the butterfly model applies even more powerfully than for an established business, because An investor thinking of investing in a startup is going to be asking two things, and they correspond to the two wings of the butterfly. The first one is there a genuine gap in the market that your amazing new product is going to fill? Is there really a need? Is there really something wrong with the world that you're going to put right? So a really tight definition of the top half of the butterfly, really important for a startup in attracting funding. But more interestingly is the bottom half, because the investor wants not just to know that there is a gap in the market that needs filling, but also that you are the person who's going to fill that gap. And they want to know why you. Why should I invest in you? What is special, interesting, distinctive about you? And I think entrepreneurs creating startups often forget that. They're very interested in a gap in the market. They're absolutely fascinated by their wonderful new product, but they forget to be clear about why it's them doing it. What's their passion for this particular field? Because if they don't have a passion for it, then an investor knows that they're going to lose interest. They will lose energy over time. The investor needs them to be totally committed for the long term. So startups need to think about branding. They don't necessarily need to hire a big branding agency, but even just thinking through the basic concepts of the butterfly could be, I think, immensely helpful for any startup. And interestingly, the class I was teaching last week, and you may have seen my my little film in the Friday email, which I made just after teaching that class, that was with a bunch of academics, or research academics. Why do they want to know about some of the secrets of branding? Because a lot of what they do is to go out looking for funding for their research. So a research academic is actually very similar to a startup entrepreneur, because they have a fantastic idea, but they need funding. And to attract funding, they need to go through the same discipline, really, of thinking about the top half and the bottom half of the butterfly, working out what's at that intersection that is really going to be worth funding, worth paying for, worth investing in. So that's something quickly about startups. And 3 minutes left to go, maybe a final question. Let me just check there's nothing else new in step 4.2. Not at the moment, no. So a question that people ask me is, what's brand consultants? What do you actually do? What's a typical day in the life of a brand strategist? And the short answer is there is no typical day at all. And the days are very varied and tend to be really packed, actually. But let me just tell you about what I'm doing today. So this morning we've been putting together ideas for this potential new client that's in the world of health research, and we'll create a pitch to that client in the next couple of weeks. Then I've had this webinar to do. I'm having lunch with someone from a market research agency, a partner that we often work with our clients. Just want to catch up with him, find out what's the latest in the world of market research, which is a business that's changing rapidly itself. Then this afternoon I'm going to be working on actually another online course that we're creating for a client, a big industrial company that wants to encourage its managers to lead in different ways. So it's another example of employee engagement we were talking about earlier on, being done at huge scale. And then also later on, I'm going to be planning a trip to New York and San Francisco, where I will be teaching colleagues of mine in those two offices about some of the things we do, some of the ways we do it in Wolf Olins, and also going back to an old client we did some work with 4 or 5 years ago, who's now thinking about what do we do for the next 5 years. That's a common question. How do we refresh what we've done? So no such thing as a typical day, but that is a day in the life of a brand strategist. I'm very glad I've been able to spend half an hour of that day with all of you future learners. I hope those answers were helpful and that you found the webinar useful, and indeed the whole course useful. And I look forward to continuing to follow all of your comments in the discussions over the last couple of stages, which in some ways actually are the most exciting stages in the whole course of The Secret Power of Brands. Thank you very much.